Officer Miller, you need to take a step back. This is a court building, not
Don't
your
tell me where I can stand. You think that uniform makes you better than...
it.
And you're coming with us. You think you can walk out of there like you're untouchable? Huh? You cost me weeks of work and you're still standing there smiling. You hear me?
The sun was beginning its slow descent over the city, casting a deceptive golden glow across the marble facade of the state Supreme Court. It was 4:45 p.m., that transition hour where the business of the day usually winds down into the quiet of the evening. On the grand staircase, a woman stood with a presence that commanded the space around her. She was the Honorable Sierra Sterling, the state's youngest Supreme Court justice, and today she was the subject of a high-profile magazine shoot. Dressed in her formal judicial robes, her signature red stilettos peeking out from beneath the heavy silk, she projected an image of absolute authority and grace. In her hand, she held a vintage wooden gavel, a family heirloom that symbolized her commitment to the law. To any rational observer, this was a moment of professional celebration, a portrait of a legal pioneer at her workplace. However, the serenity of the photo session was about to be shattered by a predatory force. A patrol cruiser suddenly hopped the curb, its tires screeching against the pavement as it came to a violent halt just inches from the staircase. Out stepped Officer Derek Miller, a veteran with a reputation for aggressive tactics and a thin fuse. He didn't see a justice. He didn't even see a civilian on public property. Miller's vision was clouded by a toxic mixture of prejudice and professional arrogance. To him, the black woman standing on the courthouse steps wasn't a high-ranking official. She was a target. He ignored the professional camera crew and the dignified setting, focusing entirely on the wooden gavel in her hand. In his mind, he wasn't witnessing a photo shoot. He was encountering a radical brandishing a weapon. The energy on the plaza shifted instantly from professional to life-altering. Without issuing a single verbal warning or attempting to de-escalate, Miller marched up the steps with his hand hovering dangerously close to his service weapon. He barked a jagged command, ordering the woman to drop what he called a stick and move away from the government building. Justice Sterling froze, but it wasn't out of the fear Miller expected. It was a moment of pure, cold disbelief. As a woman who had clawed her way through Harvard law and mastered the penal code, she knew her rights better than the man currently violating them. She had the power to end this with a single identification card, yet she chose to stand her ground. She wanted to see exactly how this officer treated a citizen who didn't hold her title. It was a high-stakes test of the Fourth Amendment, conducted on the very steps where justice is served. The confrontation escalated with a terrifying speed that suggested Miller was looking for a fight rather than a resolution. When Sterling calmly asked what crime she was committing, the question seemed to act as a trigger for Miller's ego. He loathed being questioned by anyone he deemed beneath him, and his face contorted into a shade of deep crimson. He ignored the photographer who was now capturing every second of the interaction on a high-resolution lens. Miller snarled that he wouldn't ask again, accusing her of disturbing the peace and brandishing a weapon. He was treating a sitting judge like a common street criminal, his bias acting as a blindfold to the reality of the situation. He demanded a level of respect that he was completely unwilling to provide, setting the stage for a physical encounter that would eventually cost the city millions of dollars. In a split second, reason was abandoned as Miller lunged forward to initiate an unprovoked felony stop. He didn't read her rights or ask for a name. He simply invaded her personal space with a violent, unnecessary force. He grabbed Sterling's wrist with a grip intended to cause pain, wrenching her arm back and twisting the delicate silk of her judicial robes. The gasp of pain from the justice was drowned out by the sickening sound of wood hitting concrete. Miller had snatched the heirloom gavel and hurled it onto the pavement, the symbol of her authority chipping against the dirty stone. He wasn't just making an arrest, he was attempting to humiliate a woman he perceived as an easy mark. The sound of that gavel breaking was the literal sound of a career shattering, though Miller was still too blinded by his own hubris to realize it. As Miller ratcheted the handcuffs tight, the click of the steel was a finality that echoed across the plaza. He slammed Sterling's chest against a hard marble column, ignoring her protests about her constitutional rights. "I don't care about your rights," Miller bellowed, his voice filled with a predatory, satisfied rage. He began the process of booking her on trumped-up charges of disorderly conduct and resisting an officer, despite the fact that she had remained perfectly still throughout the assault. The irony was suffocating. The very wrists that signed warrants and presided over high-stakes trials were now bound in cold iron. The photographer, realizing the historical weight of what he was witnessing, kept his shutter firing. Every bulging vein in Miller's neck and every tear of frustration in Sterling's eyes was being recorded in crystal-clear quality, creating an evidentiary trail that would be impossible to deny. The arrogance of the arrest reached its peak as Miller began to drag the justice down the very steps she presided over every day. He paraded her like a trophy, a perp walk intended to broadcast his dominance over the situation. He even turned his aggression toward the photographer, threatening him with an obstruction of justice charge if he didn't put the camera away. Miller thought he was the hunter, cleaning up the streets and asserting his will over a disorderly civilian. He had no inkling that the heavy bronze doors at the top of the stairs were about to open, and with them, the full weight of the judicial system was about to descend upon him. He was walking straight into a legal buzzsaw, carrying his own demise in the form of a handcuffed Supreme Court justice. The golden hour was over, and the long, cold night of accountability was just beginning. The heavy bronze doors of the Supreme Court finally swung open, and the silence of the plaza was shattered by the authoritative footsteps of the Chief Justice himself. Chief Justice Thomas stepped into the twilight, his eyes narrowing as he witnessed a scene that defied every principle of the American legal system. He saw one of his most esteemed colleagues, a woman of immense intellect and integrity, being shoved toward a patrol car like a common fugitive. The shock on his face quickly transitioned into a cold, focused fury that would soon become Officer Miller's ultimate undoing. Thomas didn't shout. He didn't need to. He simply walked toward the cruiser with the measured pace of a man who held the keys to the kingdom. Miller, still riding high on his adrenaline-fueled power trip, hadn't yet realized that the man approaching him had the power to dismantle his entire existence. Miller's first mistake in this new phase was attempting to bark orders at the Chief Justice. He told the old man to step back and stop interfering with a lawful arrest, his voice dripping with the same arrogance that had fueled his assault on Sterling. Thomas stopped just inches from Miller, his gaze fixed on the officer's badge number. He quietly informed Miller that he was currently holding the state's highest-ranking judicial official in unauthorized custody. The blood drained from Miller's face with a speed that was almost visible on the photographer's high-definition camera. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He hadn't just made a bad arrest, he had committed a professional suicide. The stick he had discarded was a gavel of the Supreme Court, and the perp he had assaulted was now his judge, jury, and eventual executioner. The backpedaling began almost instantly, but Miller's attempts to revise history were as clumsy as his initial assault. He stammered about a misunderstanding, claiming he was merely responding to a report of a suspicious person brandishing a weapon. However, the photographer stood as a silent witness, his camera full of high-resolution proof that Miller had ignored every sign of the justice's identity. The Chief Justice demanded that the handcuffs be removed immediately, a command that Miller followed with trembling hands. As the steel cuffs clicked open, the power dynamic on the plaza shifted forever. Sterling stood up, smoothing her ruined judicial robes with a dignity that made Miller look small and pathetic. She didn't say a word to him, but the look she gave him was a promise of a legal reckoning that would be swift, public, and absolutely devastating. Within 20 minutes, the plaza was swarming with high-ranking officials, including the city's police chief and the district attorney. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of a brewing political and legal storm. The police chief, a man who had spent years trying to bridge the gap between the community and the force, looked at Miller with a mixture of disappointment and utter contempt. On the spot and in full view of the cameras, the chief demanded Miller's badge and service weapon. It was a roadside suspension that signaled the end of a 20-year career built on the shaky foundation of intimidation. Miller stood there, stripped of his authority, looking like a man who had finally realized he was the one who was truly out of place. The very system he had weaponized was now turning its gears to grind him down. The transition from the courthouse steps to the Internal Affairs Office was a journey into the heart of professional darkness for Derek Miller. He was no longer the one asking the questions. He was the subject of a high-stakes investigation that left no stone unturned. Investigators pored over his body camera footage, which corroborated every detail of the photographer's testimony and the justice's account. The audio was particularly damning, capturing Miller's "I don't care about your rights" comment in crystal clear quality. It was an admission of guilt that no defense attorney could spin into a justifiable action. The department moved with a speed rarely seen in civil service, knowing that every second Miller remained on the payroll was a liability to the city. He was officially served with termination papers, losing his pension and his standing in the law enforcement community. While Miller faced his professional demise, the legal machinery for a massive civil rights lawsuit began to churn. Justice Sterling, represented by a team of the nation's top litigators, filed a suit that alleged assault, kidnapping under the color of law, and gross violations of the Fourth Amendment. The complaint didn't just target Miller. It aimed at the city's failure to train its officers in de-escalation and constitutional law. As the news of the arrest went national, the city's legal department realized they had no defense. The photographer's images were appearing on every major news outlet, serving as the ultimate evidence of a system gone rogue. A settlement was eventually reached that would see the city pay out a record-breaking $10 million, a sum that sent shockwaves through the local government and sparked a demand for radical police reform. The final blow to Miller's legacy came in the form of criminal charges. The district attorney, under immense public and judicial pressure, filed counts of felony assault and official misconduct against the former officer. This wasn't just a slap on the wrist. It was a clear signal that no one, regardless of the badge they wore, was above the laws they were sworn to uphold. Miller's mugshot, showing a man who had lost everything to his own bias, became a symbol of a turning tide in the American justice system. Justice Sterling returned to her bench, her heirloom gavel repaired and back in her hand, but she was forever changed by the encounter. She became a leading voice for judicial reform, using her lived experience to ensure that no other citizen would ever have to face a predator on the steps of justice. The viral footage of Justice Sterling's arrest became a catalyst for a national conversation that the city's leadership could no longer ignore. Across all 50 states, people watched as a professional woman was stripped of her dignity by an officer who believed he was untouchable. The images weren't just a local news story. They were a digital manifesto for civil rights in the 21st century. Protesters gathered outside the very courthouse where the assault occurred, their signs demanding more than just a settlement. They wanted systemic change that would prevent another Derek Miller from ever wearing a badge. The city council, feeling the heat of public outrage, fast-tracked legislation that mandated body cam transparency and independent oversight for all use of force incidents. It was a rare moment where the wheels of bureaucracy turned with the speed of a high-speed pursuit, driven by the undeniable visual evidence of a system that had failed. Inside the precinct, the atmosphere was one of somber reflection mixed with a quiet, simmering tension. The blue wall of silence, which had protected Miller for decades, was finally showing deep, irreparable cracks. Officers who had previously looked the other way during his aggressive field stops were now being questioned by internal affairs about the culture of the shift. This wasn't just about one bad apple. It was about the orchard that had allowed him to thrive. Training sessions were completely overhauled to include mandatory seminars on implicit bias and constitutional policing, led by experts who didn't pull any punches. Many veteran officers struggled with the shift, but the younger recruits saw it as a necessary evolution of the job. They realized that their authority came from the consent of the people, not from the weight of their duty belt or the intimidation of a felony stop conducted poorly today. 6 months after the incident, the sentencing hearing for Derek Miller became a media circus that drew spectators from across the country. The courtroom was packed with legal scholars, activists, and fellow officers, all waiting to see if the justice system could truly police its own. Miller sat at the defense table, his head bowed, stripped of the uniform that had once been his armor. When Justice Sterling took the stand to deliver her victim impact statement, the room fell into a silence so profound you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. She spoke not of her own pain, but of the damage Miller had done to the public's trust in the law. She looked directly at her attacker and told him that while he had broken her gavel, he had failed to break the truth. The judge sentenced Miller to 5 years, a stern verdict for him. Justice Sierra Sterling didn't let the trauma of that sunset encounter define her career. Instead, she used it as a springboard for unprecedented judicial activism. She authored several landmark opinions that clarified the limits of qualified immunity, ensuring that citizens had a clear path to hold rogue officers accountable. Her face, once a target for Miller's aggression, now graced the covers of legal journals as a symbol of resilience and reform. She frequently toured the country, speaking at law schools and police academies about the delicate balance between public safety and individual liberty. Her repaired gavel became a legendary artifact, a reminder that even the strongest systems can be cracked, but they can also be made stronger through the fire of conflict. Under her leadership, the court became a beacon of hope for those who felt invisible to the law, proving that even a single voice can change history now. The case also set a new standard for how digital evidence is handled in civil rights litigation. Forensic experts spent hundreds of hours analyzing every frame of the photographer's high-resolution images, matching them with the metadata from Miller's deactivated body cam. This level of technical scrutiny made it impossible for the defense to claim that the footage was out of context or manipulated. The court's decision to allow the full, unedited video to be entered into the public record created a blueprint for future transparency. It sent a message to every precinct in the country. The truth will eventually come to light, and it will be rendered in 4K resolution. The reliance on independent third-party visuals proved to be the ultimate equalizer in a system that had too often relied on the word of an officer over the testimony of a civilian. The era of the digital eye had finally arrived. As the lights of the Supreme Court flicker on each evening, they serve as a silent vigil for the night when justice was almost extinguished by prejudice. The story of Justice Sterling and Officer Miller is more than a simple crime narrative. It is a profound lesson in the fragile nature of our legal foundations. It reminds us that authority is a privilege that must be earned every single day, and that the badge is a symbol of service, not a license for abuse. While the $10 million settlement and the 5-year sentence provided a sense of closure, the real victory was in the reform that followed. Today, the courthouse steps remain a place of civic pride, where portraits are still taken and the law is still practiced. The echo of the broken gavel has faded, replaced by the steady, unyielding heartbeat of a system that, for once, matters.